The sky turned red, the ground shook, and the air smelled of sulfur. It was the end of the world and no one could escape it. People tried to flee, but it was too late. The apocalypse had come, and it was merciless. The seas rose, the mountains crumbled, and the cities burned. The screams of the dying echoed through the wasteland, and the only thing left was despair. But there was something else, something lurking in the shadows, something that fed on the fear of the survivors. It was a creature of darkness, born from the chaos of the end times. Its eyes glowed red, its skin black as coal, and its voice was a whisper that could make your blood run cold. No one knew where it came from or what it wanted. Some said it was a demon, others thought it was a manifestation of humanity's collective guilt. But one thing was certain: it was real, and it was coming for them. The survivors huddled together in makeshift camps, hoping to find safety in numbers. But the creature found them anyway. It stalked them through the ruins of civilization, picking them off one by one. Some it dragged into the darkness, never to be seen again. Others it tortured for hours before finally devouring them whole. The end of the world was bad enough, but this was worse. This was hell on earth, and there was no escape. The survivors prayed for a miracle, but none came. They had to face the horror of the end times alone, with only their own wits and courage to protect them. In the end, only a few remained. They banded together, armed themselves, and prepared for the final battle. They knew they couldn't defeat the creature, but they hoped to at least take it down with them. The night of the final battle was dark and stormy. Lightning flashed overhead, and the wind howled like a banshee. The survivors stood at the edge of a cliff, looking out at the endless abyss that lay before them. And then it came. The creature emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing like hot coals. It laughed as it approached them, knowing that it had already won. But the survivors didn't give up. They fought with everything they had, using every weapon at their disposal. And in the end, they succeeded. They didn't kill the creature, but they weakened it enough to send it back to whatever hell it had come from. The survivors were left alone, in a world destroyed and empty. They had won the battle, but at what cost? They knew that they would never forget the horror they had faced, and they would never truly be free of the fear that had consumed them. And so they stood there, at the edge of the abyss, wondering what would come next. For the end of the world was only the beginning of something new, something that they couldn't even begin to imagine. The world ended not with a bang, but with a whisper. It started with a strange illness, one that spread quickly and killed indiscriminately. Within months, it had infected billions, and the world was in chaos. The illness didn't kill right away. It took weeks, sometimes even months, for the symptoms to show. But when they did, they were horrific. The infected would start to bleed from their eyes, their ears, their nose, and their mouth. Their skin would turn gray and mottled, and they would become delirious with pain. The worst part was that there was no cure. Doctors and scientists worked tirelessly to find a way to stop the illness, but it was too late. The world had already succumbed to the disease. As the illness spread, something else began to happen. The dead started to rise. They weren't like the zombies of movies and books, mindless and hungry for flesh. These were something else entirely. They were intelligent, cunning, and completely devoid of empathy. They looked like the people they had once been, but their eyes were cold and dead, and their movements were stiff and jerky. The living soon found themselves outnumbered and outmatched. They tried to fight back, but it was no use. The dead were relentless, and they showed no mercy. The world became a battlefield, with the living fighting for survival against the dead. It was a losing battle, but the living refused to give up. One group of survivors found themselves in a fortress of a building, one that had been designed to withstand even the worst disasters. They thought they were safe, but they were wrong. The dead found them, and they attacked with a fury that was unmatched. The survivors fought back, using whatever weapons they had, but it was no use. The dead kept coming, wave after wave, until the survivors were overwhelmed. But the worst was yet to come. As the survivors lay dying, they heard something else. It was a whisper, a voice that spoke in a language they couldn't understand. It was the voice of the dead, and it was calling them to join their ranks. The survivors tried to resist, but they couldn't. They felt themselves slipping away, becoming something else entirely. And so the world ended not with a bang, but with a whisper that promised an eternity of pain and suffering, as the dead claimed their final victory over the living. The survivors stumbled through the desolate wasteland, their weary bodies pushing them forward despite the fatigue that weighed heavily upon them. It had been weeks since they had seen another living soul, and the silence of their surroundings was deafening. The world had ended in fire and destruction. The sky was a permanent shade of red, and the air was thick with ash and smoke. There were no animals or plants left, no sign of life. It was as if the world had been wiped clean of all its inhabitants, save for the handful of people still clinging to life. The survivors had banded together, using their combined skills to navigate the ruins of the world. They had managed to scavenge enough supplies to keep themselves alive, but they knew that they were living on borrowed time. They needed to find a way out of this wasteland, to find a place where they could start anew. But their journey was fraught with danger. They had encountered gangs of raiders who had tried to take what little they had. They had stumbled across traps and hidden dangers, narrowly avoiding death at every turn. And then, there was the creature. A massive, terrifying beast that seemed to be stalking them, watching their every move. They could feel its presence in the shadows, hear its breathing in the darkness. It was as if it was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The survivors tried to prepare themselves, gathering what weapons they could find and setting traps to try and catch the creature off guard. But nothing seemed to work. The creature was always one step ahead, always watching, always waiting. And then one night it attacked. The survivors were huddled together trying to get some sleep when they heard a rustling in the bushes. They sprang to their feet, weapons at the ready, but it was too late. The creature was already upon them. It was a massive creature, at least 10 times the size of a man. Its skin was black as coal, and it seemed to glow with an eerie, otherworldly light. Its eyes were red and glowing, and its mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. The survivors backed away, fear coursing through their veins. They had never seen anything like this creature before, and they had no idea how to fight it. But then, they heard a voice in their minds. It was the same voice that had been whispering to them for weeks, but this time it was stronger, more insistent. "Serve me," the voice said, "and I will spare your lives." The survivors looked at each other, unsure of what to do. They knew that they couldn't fight this creature, but they also knew that they couldn't give in to its demands. And then, they heard another voice. This one was faint, but it was familiar. It was the voice of one of their fallen comrades, a voice that they had thought was lost forever. "Fight," the voice said. "Don't give up. You can defeat it." The survivors took a deep breath and raised their weapons. They knew that they were outnumbered and outmatched, but they also knew that they had to try. The creature lunged at them, its massive claws slashing through the air. The survivors dodged and weaved, trying to avoid its attacks. They struck back with all their might, their weapons clashing against its skin. The battle raged on for what felt like hours. The survivors were exhausted, their bodies battered and bruised, but they refused to give up. They knew that they had to defeat this creature, no matter the cost. In the end, they succeeded. They managed to strike the creature's weak spot, a small patch of skin on its belly. Thanks for watching today's video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps us out. And until next time, stay safe and never wander too far from the light.